Media Essential Workers. I'm joined today by my good friend who I've met virtually throughout the course of this pandemic. We've communicated. One thing I didn't know about Jack Suske was this, that he started his career much the same way I did, as a news stringer. Jack, a lot of us have heard that in passing, but people don't really know what that is. We're going to get into a little of your background and then transition to how you got into the stringer life. I understand your first ambition in life was to follow your dad's footsteps and be a law enforcement officer. What happened?
Yep. He said no. He said, no, I don't think that's a good path for you. Actually, I wanted to be a firefighter first. And my mother said no to that too. And she was like, no, you're not going to get burned up in a building. No, that's not good. And, worried about your lungs and all that. Anyway, and I said, well, how about a police officer? And that's when he said no. And I was like, well, that brings us to what am I going to do? Because I was a adrenaline junkie at the time, growing up in high school and that. And, I had a bunch of friends that were volunteer firefighters and, worked for at that time they called them civil defense agencies and that. And they were all chased fires and they kind of met up in the middle of the night at a burning building somewhere. And their friends were on the fire department and that. And I ended up hanging out with them. And, that it was a thing I was kind of interested in, and was always the excitement of chasing and being my father being, on the police force. We always had the police radio going on in the house somewhere.
Jack, can I interject and share a little personal anecdote as well?
Sure.
So my sister was for a brief while a firefighter, and the way she got interested in it is she came to visit me. She's in Massachusetts now, and rode along with me, and kind of we went to an accident with extrication, which is something that we will describe, obviously, when they use the jaws of life and pull people out. And she's riding along with me and just gets a new appreciation for what these firefighters do and how quickly they do it. And she marked to me, although I don't think she'll publicly ever admit it, that that's the day that she decided she wanted to be a firefighter, being a firsthand witness to what it is that they do. So it's very interesting how it's kind of a symbiotic relationship between the first responders and the professional observers. Before we came online, we were talking about the guys in on-scene video out in LA, many of who, well, you know what, maybe not so much in LA, but the ones in New York with the Village Video, a lot of them are firefighters / paramedics. It's kind of something you can't get out of your blood when you have that rush and addiction to the adrenaline. How did that play into what you and your fire buff friends would do when you went out there? How did it inspire?
Well, it was, it's funny when you would get to when there was a bigger fire. I mean, it was I'm going to say this loosely, a community gathering, being that community of what do you call it, firefighter groupies and police officer groupies, because it was the same people showing up at the same things, and it became, oh, were you at this one? Oh, I remember that fire. I was here and we did this, or I was working at, ladder company or engine company, and we were doing this. And, and it got to be, you got to see your people you ended up hanging around with at fires. It was just a weird, community, and you'd see at the same time, you would see there was photographers, still photographers and people that use that as subject matter, and you would start seeing the same people everywhere, and it became for lack of a better a social gathering, even though someone's life is being ruined in front of them, or their business that they've worked for 30 years is burning down to the ground. Everybody was out there socializing and talking about stuff and what's going on in that. So it's, it became a little community, and that's how you look at it.
When you videotape it, some of the photographers, you were talking about some of the videographers, I think some of the things that I found most inspirational were able to be profile the heroic actions of these firefighters, and again, police officers, and some of these people who sometimes more and more it seems now you hear the negative, you hear the bad rap. I'll tell you this, we are coming live from the wonderful village of Lisle, Illinois, where last week one of the police officers in this city, in this village, went in, removed an air conditioning unit, went in and saved a 14-year-old child. And those are the kind of opportunities that we also have to present and show the heroic actions that if we weren't out there in the middle of the night sometimes would never get the attention that they too deserve, right?
Right. I'm
tell us about
actually, to
that.
be very honest with you, I'm quite disappointed in A&E's decision to remove live PD. I mean, I can understand both. I can understand the business side of it, and I can understand, maybe in some point in the early summer, things were probably pretty dangerous for everybody out there.
Hmm.
But to me, live PD was one of the better shows to watch. I mean, it was you got to see the human side of the law enforcement officer and what they have to deal with, and quite frankly, that's not a pretty picture. I mean, very seldom do you get. It's much easier to show the bad side of things than what's going on or what people are.
I would argue it's sometimes easier, right? It's sometimes easier to make that argument than to investigate, to be on the scene, Johnny on the spot, to get the heroic actions. Because here's the thing, and I'm sure it was the condition when you were working too. If you have the video, they're going to run it. If you have the video of a rescue in progress, they're going to run it. That's going to be the story. If you don't have it, but you have dash cam video showing the opposite, that's going to be the story that's run.
Sure. I mean, obviously, I think our society is built on visuals nowadays, and it's unfortunately the visual tells that moment in time, and not the events leading up to and following the follow on to it, because and nowadays the news cycle is over in 24 hours, and that incident is going on for people way longer than people have forgotten about it on TV, and it's difficult that people don't see what the stuff going up to it and the aftermath either, because we don't care about it, because there's a better video coming out tomorrow.
Jack, let me ask you this. Let's talk about what's in the blood of people like yourself and me when we're in the middle of the adrenaline. We were talking actually before the program started. You asked me if I watched Shot in the Dark. And I know most stringers would probably be a fan of that. And I expressed to you quite candidly that it depresses me a little bit, because as much as I love covering news, I miss being in the thick of things, right? Trying to beat police officers and firefighters to a scene, get that first shot there. And you also said that you kind of, you understand that, right? Because there's a different perspective between being a staff news photographer sometimes and the mentality of a stringer in terms of getting to that story very quickly. You hung out in a community fire buff situation. At some point, you made a decision to make this a career and to see if you could do this for work. Your parents didn't want you to go into firefighting or law enforcement, but they encouraged your decision to become a journalist. Tell me about it.
Well, I to be honest with you, that wasn't so much the journalist side that I liked. I enjoyed at the time at this transition between coming out of college or coming out of high school into college, and that live minicam was a new technology. I'm trying to think what would even be equated to it now. We were able to the ability for news organizations to take somebody live to whatever it be right then and there and broadcast live. That was never possible before. That was just literally happening when I got interested in it, and I was more intrigued by the technology of being able to broadcast from literally anywhere in the city and bring it to the TV right now. I mean, I kind of laughed because I talked to some older guys that I used to follow, and I was like, yeah, I was a minicam junkie or a groupie. I mean, I remember going to when the big thing when there was no live anything happening. We did, you do a live weather hit on Lakeshore Drive. So when I'd be monitoring, the assignment desk, and they're like, oh, well, whatever, minicam 1, you're going to whatever, North Avenue Beach for a live shot. I would go out there and see what they were doing, because the whole thing was new. Nobody's seen, this is a strange dish on the top of a truck, and there's a guy up there pointing it to a building, and there's a guy out there with this camera, a big kind of thing, and they're taking pictures, and we're talking to a guy who's standing in front of the camera with a microphone, and they're going live to literally everybody, millions of people. That was the intrigue I had. and to incorporate that with emergencies and stuff, breaking news. That was that was no doubt that's what I wanted to do, and it would. I think the news part of it started early on, and that was in radio news. I know you guys up in Chicago have WBBM radio, and there at the time WGN was a major force to be reckoned with as far as live radio, which we don't have anymore. And I remember literally growing up with Chicago Eddie Schwartz. I don't know if you know the name, but he had a live overnight talk show, and basically it was, I would describe it as, he had interesting different guests on, a lot of local people, but there was always it was all based around what was happening tonight. And there was a gentleman on the radio that he would have call into the radio show and do a live phone in, what we call a phoner now, and it was Larry Schreiner. And he would talk to Eddie Schwartz.
Well, let's get into a little bit about that, because Larry Schreiner is in the stringer world, kind of a legacy, also a legacy in the radio world as somebody who was kind of a pioneer in this. So thank you for setting that up. There is one question that, as you were talking, I kind of wanted to get some clarification on before we move. When you say that kind of a transition had happened between media that wasn't live into live, what kind of time frame are we looking at? What year was this where that kind of had transitioned between not live to live was a new technology that people were fascinated with?
I'm going to say it was early, off my head, 76, 77 type, where it became it wasn't where the local affiliates were able to do that that didn't require additional planning, power. It was able to do a spot news. We could pull up and go live relatively quickly.
Your mask could go up.
Yeah, at the time, there was no masks. There was a tripod on the roof of the truck.
Really?
They had I couldn't find it, but there's a picture of me standing with the WBBM minicam with the gentleman on the roof of the truck pointing the dish. And that was the extent of there was no mask. That came later. And then WMAQ, a year or two after that, and I forget the engineer's name, I know probably Ed Mann or someone like that would come up with it, or one of the older times. They came up with what they called the van ladder. And that was, you'd still see it around very rarely today on service trucks that do signs in front of stores. They had the telescoping ladder, and someone had the idea to put a dish on the front of the ladder and would able to get up and get above and get higher, and that was the very first mask type thing that
Jack, I don't even want to get into the radiation that potentially you guys had subjected.
Radiation, whatever.
Oh, yeah, safety. but again, these are the tools of the trade very early in the profession. I want to just real quickly, if you would indulge me, the way my wife indulges me in even keeping this piece of equipment in my car. Sarah, hand me that flashlight. Let's give a kind of behind the scenes look at some of the technology that has changed since the time you were a stringer to when I was. We are going to, you're going to get a little behind the scenes of the studio, AKA my house, another thing my wife wishes I get rid of. But we are going to take a look at some of the technology and equipment that really paints the picture of what it was that stringers dealt with. Let's take a look.
Sure. Okay.
All right. Jack, can you hear me?
I hear you fine.
I'm going into the garage.
Going into the garage?
This is a garage that would have a lot of space, a lot more space, if it wasn't for this beauty, which is a part of my 20s, which, hey, Sarah, if you can hear me, you can kill the studio for me, please. So this was, a part of my youth, and I know that it was something that that you we're able to do in a Jeep. Let's give the audience a little taste of what it is we're looking at, because some of these tools are timeless.
It looks like you have a couple of Motrax. You went high end. You had actually commercial radio gear there, and you had it nicely mounted. I didn't have quite the budget for. I had Bearcat 210, 250 scanners and different radios that I had 13 antennas on my car, but they were nowhere near as mounted as nice as you did. But
you had back seat, didn't you?
Yep. And I see you have your gear in the back seat there that came in handy. And that was my problem. When I started out, I only had one record deck, and I had to bring back to the house to make dubs so I could pedal my wares, so to speak. But at least I laugh because how many times can I think of when you had a hot story to roll on and the car wouldn't start because of the cold Chicago winters. Oh. And, you'd be like, roll your head. But
well, more than a few times. And I got to tell you, some of these things are rigged in such a way that they're very intensive in power draw. And if there's one thing that goes wrong, you're not starting that car without a jumper.
That's exactly right. It's happened many times, and that always became you'd miss a story or miss a shot and go, okay, the next day you're on the phone with the video dealer to buy another battery charger or more batteries or whatever. And go, I'm not going to get caught that way again. And essentially that was what I ended up doing when I got my first cell phone. I was one of the first 13 people to have a cellular phone in the country because I wasn't going to let somebody else do a radio phone in before me and possibly get more, whatever. $100 was $100 when you're going to college,
Remember that movie, The Public Eye, when is it Pesci, I think, walks out and the guy's trying to hustle a picture he got and he's like waving the cash and he's like, sale already made.
Yep.
Kind of what it was like in those days, right? Exactly. If you're not first there handing your tape over to the station, you risk not getting that sale unless you have something compellingly better.
Right. Oh yeah. And exactly. There was the shoot it. And then there was the race to, you get on the phone and start working the phone. And then as you're working the phone, getting down to the city to hand off the tape to somebody, some desk assistant at, 3 a.m, and hopefully you had a couple copies that you could pass around, and it was a good time. It was one of them times you look back on and kind of cherish and laugh about now and go, why did I even do that? I know why I did it, but now I just kind of laugh and think about how easy, quote unquote, easy the job is compared to where I had it when we started out, and now in the world of digital and sending it in through the internet, and it's a different world out there, and it goes that way for everything. You tell people that do it now and they're like, they don't understand the difficulty that you had to try and do that. I mean, granted, multi-million-dollar broadcast companies were trying to field a couple crews to do the same thing, and here you're independent person out there trying to finance your own thing, TV, any kind of my like I said, my first TV camera was, an RCA that I think came in at about $1,200, which was a fortune at the time. And I had to upgrade because they were like the station of people at the assignment desk were like, we could use a lot more if it was better quality. And, then fortunately, a few of my contacts steered me the right way and, ended up buying better gear. And, next thing I got a room full of gear that I was able to, make some money with. But it was interesting times. And like I said, I don't think I'd trade them, but I don't think I'd want to do them again. And I certainly know I couldn't physically do it. I remember, getting up in the middle of the night or trying to sleep with one ear open to, 5 scanners in the house. And then when you'd hear something, you'd start to roll out and get ready and go, well, you could tell. And that's another thing that I think stringers or people that cover the new, overnight beat, I'm going to call it the overnight beat, the crime beat, that they know when you hear things on the radio that pique your interest, that go, that's not normal, or that's, that's going to happen. That's going to turn out to be something that ain't. I could tell immediately from something to roll on versus, yeah, that's a garage fire, and
And
again,
it can be a candor in the voice, right? The way they say something like call conversation
versus the people on the scene, the people first showing up. And I think that's a skill that you just develop by knowing the people, knowing, living with a police officer all my life, you knew what it took, and it takes a lot to get wound up. Their baseline of excitement is very different than the normal person's. And if you got any of them, if you heard that in their voice or any kind of level of excitement, there was something going on that you decided, yep, it's time to head out and see what's happening, And a lot of times it busted, but then that's the nature of the game, and you had to judge that. And, and especially, hey, I got an early morning class tomorrow. I got a 9 a.m. class to do TV production. Do I go and stay out on this, 311 armed fire, or do I get some sleep and try to pass my class, But
what was the decision usually? What kept that? What was it, the studying, or was it roll?
It was always, you always go, because that was, of course, that was me. I figured there's anything I could learn in the classroom, I would have learned on the street anyway, and that was, and probably was a way better, in my book, it's still a way better way of teaching people than to go, you can teach. I taught college classes on TV and stuff, and it's just, nothing replaces being out on the road, and that's, the one big difference that I'm going to probably make this a transition is the big difference I seen was from being a stringer photog or whatever, and working for myself as versus working for someone, a station, and being told what to do. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think when we talked prior, I worked in minicam for about a year at station. Over my course of my career, I spent about a year down in the minicam shop. And after a while, I decided that was really not what I wanted, and fanned out to different things, because I really didn't like the fact to be honest with you, and I could care less about staking out the school board to see if they're going to strike for the next week, and I was like, this is brutal to sit out there and listening to people come out and make a 2-minute statement that could have been handed out versus, there's stuff happening in the city that was more exciting to me,
Let's go back, because I know you want to make that transition. I want to pull you back into the stringer way of life before we make that transition.
Yeah.
Show me that picture that you had. Explain to me what it was like working against one of the pioneers in the stringer business, Larry Schreiner.
Yeah.
I didn't know who that was at first.
I'm going to jokingly call him my nemesis, but I think he was really a mentor.
Really?
I admired what he did. As much as people, a lot of the older people in the minicam business, I'm going to refer to the minicam business, the field guys disliked him because they were taking our jobs. That was the overall opinion. Here's this guy out there not being a union person, taking our job, but he was getting stuff that, in reality, when you look back at it, he wasn't taking anybody's job. The company that you worked for was released after 10:30, after the news show, or 11 o'clock. If it was nothing, you were good nighted and sent home. That left a huge void overnight. And
I will take a moment. I am the vice president of the NABIT union. I was also a stringer. I think there is a big disparity in people's understanding of the two roles. I'll tell you this, every year that I was a stringer, I was a dues-paying member of NABIT. I had joined when I had worked at Univision. And people, I think there was a mentality that they're very contrary positions. But I can tell you this, not myself, but there were a number of stringers who worked during the strikes and who refused to cross picket lines. Because again, these people were not out to take jobs. It was a different mentality of what to do. And I think there's a lack of understanding with that sometimes. And a lack of understanding, there are people out there who are still stringers, who are members of NABED, who are members of IBW. They are what's known as freelance daily hire photographers who are trying to make their way. And I think it's a very important distinction to make because there's a misunderstanding of that sometimes.
Well, I think, again, what we're looking back, what is 1979, 80, that we didn't know, people didn't have, it was a new animal. It was like anything, and it was a new way. What is going on? He's got, there's these guys that are doing our jobs and they're not one of us. Well, true. I mean, I will say, I did a lot of it because I was trying to build a reel to get my foot in the door, because how else do you do it, and to get your name known. And, obviously if you had some kind of work history that, other people worked at stations in other lower level markets and then moved up to Chicago or whatever. Sure. They had some of their work, but if you're in Chicago, you're competing at a, number 2 market, and how do you do that? So yeah, I was using that experience and
Was Chicago number 2 at that time? I know now it falls
2 or
third.
Yeah, I believe it was either 2 or it was a second or third market. I believe it was 2 at one point, right under New York, and I think LA may have changed that.
We had this discussion, and I've had this discussion with other guests as well, that sometimes timing is everything. Timing, making sure you're there when a job is open. Tell us about how the transition to come into WMAQ happened for you, because I understand that there was some timing that almost was obstructed with a trip that you were taking.
The timing is everything, and I mean, literally, it's a string of circumstances that you would not believe, that happened, but it was a way, being, I don't remember how many people remember the VR routine, but you'd apply and get a letter for an interview, and you'd come in and they would interview, I don't know, 100, 200 people at a go. Mind you, this is, they had a lot more staff, there was a lot more staff to have. So you had a lot more. And there was no such thing as a daily hire or a, freelance person. It was, we needed staff to replace you. So you had to go fill out, you got your letter, you come in for an interview, they'd interview you. And typically the process was, tell us what you can do, show us how driven, how motivated you are. And
you wanted to be a cameraman at this time, correct? You wanted to be a cameraman.
I wanted to be a minicam. That was my goal, news cameraman. I wanted to be out there driving the minicam. That was my life goal at the time. And, I think I sent you a picture, but I finally made it. I did drive a minicam. But anyway, the person who was scheduled, who does the vacation relief interviews, was out sick that day. And she was not able to do any interviews. So the person who got to do my interview, he came out, I'm sitting in the lobby, and he came out and was very, let's say, just put off that he had to do an extra, I got to deal with these VR interviews today. So, he was not exactly happy about it. So he came out, he told me, hey, Suske, come out here. I guess I'm dealing with you today. Come on back. We got to talk. And I was like, okay, this is going well, because he had a very gruff exterior. Mm-hmm. Turned out to be a great guy. Loved, liked him, and anyway, we talked, and he was very just going through the motions of, yeah, okay, so so what can you do? Camera guy. Oh, you want to be a camera? Oh, great, yeah. He goes, I got 50 resumes here for camera guys. Why should I hire you? And you do the story, and you do your song and dance and sales job, and try to put your best foot forward. And he was basically going nowhere. And I was like, yeah, this ain't going well. And I says, well, he goes, what do you do now? And I told him I was a chief engineer at the college TV station. And his eyes kind of picked up, and he was like, what do you mean? I go, well, I'm the chief engineer. I run 2 studios. I maintain all the portable gear, the edit systems, the TV cameras. I'm the guy. If something breaks, you call me. He goes, so you're telling me, and he got up out of his chair or looked in, he got up and goes, so you're telling me you can fix, if you were out at Soldier Field and a TV camera goes down in a football game that I'm doing, I could send you out there and you're going to fix it for me. And I said, well, I'm going to try. Yeah, that would be what I'm there for. Sure. He goes, hold on. I got to talk. Hold on. And he picked up and left. And I was like, oh, what's this about? Because I was, calling this day a wrap. Yeah. He brought back another engineer of maintenance, or manager of maintenance and transmitters. And he was like, this is Fred, this is Jack. He says he can be a maintenance man. And he goes, I want you to take the interview. So he said, I come over to my office. So we moved over there and we talked about it. And we talked about fixing things and fixing monitors and cameras and just general stuff and soldering and basic stuff, wiring. And he was like, he goes, you're perfect. This is, I need a couple guys. I need 3 slots filled. You're, good. So we wrap up the interview and I went on my way and I had a pretty good feeling. I was like, well, that went well, better than I thought. And a couple weeks later, about 2 weeks later, I got a letter from WMAQ that said, thanks, but no thanks. Try again next year, because that was all part of the cycle of, if you don't, you go, you get reapply again next year, and you slowly move up the list till you get in. That was their procedure. And if they need,
you were bummed.
Nothing wrong. It was the way it was.
You had other things to do.
Yeah.
You on with life.
Right. So I went back to my job. I was disappointed. Oh, great. I missed my job. And you did that. You did that sometimes for all 3 stations, hoping that somebody would, bring you in for a 6-month gig. And,
but then what happened? They told you that, sorry, you went somewhere else.
Yeah. You can try again next year. So depressed, and you're like, okay, go back to work. And I said, well, I'm going to go down to my parents were down in Florida. I'm going to go down and enjoy the beach for a week or two. And, just get back to going back to regular life till next year. So I'm down in Florida, and my grandfather was sick at the time in Chicago, and he calls down at our place in Florida, and he goes, hey, WMAQ's on the phone, and they want to know where you're at. And I was like, wow, what? And he goes, yeah, he read he goes, yeah, this guy called. He goes, he wants to know you were supposed to be there at 9:00 today. And I was like, oh, well, okay, well, give me his number and I'll call him and find out what's going on. I call, make a long story short, that I got the wrong letter, and it was supposed to be starting at 9 a.m. on Monday. And he was like, where are you? You're supposed to be here. I'm expecting you to come in. And I said, well, I got the letter that says no thank you and see you next year. And he was like, oh, he goes, did they send you that letter? He goes, no. He goes, when can you start? I go, well, I'm in Florida right now. And he goes, well, when can you be here? I says, I'll be here tomorrow. I'll be there tomorrow at 9 a.m. He goes, you'll be there tomorrow? I said, yeah, I'll be there. So immediately dropped everything, got on an airplane and flew back and started my maintenance career at WMAQ at the next day, and was able to start my illustrious career fixing black and white monitors for the summer, and doing stuff that they needed done while everybody else was taking time off. And that's literally how it worked. I mean, it was a weird set of circumstances, being, if my grandfather wasn't sick, no one would have been home to get the call. They would have probably just blown me off as another guy who didn't call him back. And I would have never, and once again, at the time, if you didn't take their offer, you were essentially, I wouldn't say blacklisted, but you went to the bottom of the list. Because at the time, the jobs were
wanted that job. There was plenty of people.
There was a plum job. You only have a couple of big, TV stations to market, and it was the same thing. You had to play by their rules to get to stay, because at the end of your only was a temporary shift or a 6 month, or not even a 6 month. It was like a 4 month gig. And at the end of the month, and it was like an understanding, this is a temporary job. You will be released at September 30th or whatever. You understand that going in. And then as you worked, you understood that, well, maybe you might get kept on, you might not. And it was a whole game they played. And if you were liked, you ended up staying. If you were a total, just didn't work out, you didn't get called back. But that's how it worked, and that's how I got started. And it turns out that the guy who let me come in, got me into the maintenance group, he was in charge of field operations at the time, and I don't know if they had it. What
Jack,
the status was when you were there, but that was the people who ran the network TV trucks for the network shows, the football games, the Christmas tree lightings, and all the big. He was kind of an offshoot to.
Was that Fred Roddy?
Fred Roddy was the guy who hired me. Yeah.
Okay.
And he was the one in charge of the maintenance and transmitters. And actually, it was Jack Signorelli who was the guy who was in charge of field, and he was the one who actually recognized the value of my skill and what I could bring to it. And to make a long story short, he was what I ended up doing is more field work than anything else. After the fact that I seen the downsides of working in the news department, and I think I related a story where they were you would I lost my train of thought.
I apologize for that. It might be because I
I was like, anyway,
I think it's just good information to know.
Actually, I was reading it too.
Thanks, October 31st. Ed, thanks for watching. And Jack, out of respect and deference for you, I'm going to stop popping up comments. I'll just mention them as we go, because again, I invite everyone who's watching. Looks like we have quite a few followers to engage with us, to interact and share memories. And like this, now it just threw me off. But again, since we are both sidetracked now, Jack, I'm going to pop it up. Jack, let me read it right now. I've never been good at public reading, but let's try it now. Jack Sigonelli was in charge of Chicago's mobile unit, CG3, the CG5, which network used most of the time. What does that mean? Jack, tell me, what does that mean?
Well, from what I gathered from the cryptic stuff that the networks used, I believe that was Chicago Color Unit number 3, and Chicago Color Unit number 5.
Is that what that means, Ed? Give us a thumbs up.
Ed can verify me on that was what it was. But of course, as in anything with NBC, that was Chicago off, and the New York trucks were labeled N1 through N8, and then all of a sudden you got CG3 and CG5, which they all work for the same company, but we had this weird nomenclature. And of course, in Burbank, they had N1, which was a New York truck, but it was out in Burbank, and it was a crazy time. But it turns out, like I said, the reason I ended up kind of leaning towards field operations as opposed to news was I got frustrated with like I said, doing stakeout duty. Half the time of my year, I sat out in front of Father Jenko's house in Joliet, Illinois, who was like held hostage in Lebanon for years. And the news department had parked a live unit out in front of his house just in case he was released. And they wanted to be able to go live. So we had a live truck parked out in front of his house literally for months on end. And part of my summer relief job was to go take Minicam 5, was the 5 or 1. We had to have the big mast to go out to Joliet and sit there and literally start at 7 a.m., drive out there and wait all day till 7 o'clock at night until the news decided that it ain't going to happen today, and pack it in and drive back. And that's literally what I did most of the summer. And I was like, you started going bonkers. I mean, we were listening to the assignment desk and everybody's doing stuff.
Jack,
and you're sitting there going.
I kind of want to, before I lose my train of thought, ask you about something. And I'm not obviously comparing the two stories, but the one time I remember when the live trucks were pretty much parked in a residential neighborhood waiting to get a shot was with Drew Peterson. I remember the neighbors did not like the generator noise, did not like the fact that a truck was always sitting there. However, when you were covering this was less television stations, the heyday of legendary TV. Yeah. Were you guys viewed as being obnoxious, or were you guys viewed as, oh my God, these are the guys I'm getting my message maker from. I want to see what the perception of neighborhoods were when a news truck was parked in a residential neighborhood, as loud as they can be.
You were the center of attention.
Huh.
And it's taken a radical turn in the last 5 years, I would say. But you were the center of attention. Everybody was curious, doing the slow roll by your truck. I mean, we didn't have the generator on. You would sit there and had the radio on, or waiting, listening to the assignment desk, or listening to whatever was on the radio, because there was nothing to do. But and occasionally there would be like, oh, maybe they might be released, or they're talking. Somebody would come out, they'd send a reporter out, and then you put up the mast and do your thing. And when that was happening, then you get a crowd of people around you, or I wouldn't say a crowd of 4 or 5 curiosity seekers, and see that. But it was very much, you were the what's going on? Why is Channel 5 out here? What are they doing? What's going on? And a lot of people didn't even know you're sitting in front of somebody's house. But needless to say, that was a pretty dry assignment, And then occasionally you would, change. You would get, okay, you got to do a different shift. You're working nights or something. And like I told you once, I think one of our fine reporters, and I say that in the best of terms, Rich Samuels, was a street reporter. I would say a solid street reporter that got to the story. I mean, there's a whole nother issue there, but I mean, these were guys that were reporters in what I would think of as the hat with the little press thing in behind, getting the story going, working the street, finding out, doing the interviews, and I don't want to disparage anybody, but doing stuff from your desk, doing your research on the internet. This was hitting the street, getting people, talking to people, figuring it out, And I mean, there's guys that I kind of really enjoyed that era of, I don't know, John Drummond, crime stories, where people actually worked doing the legwork, or as I would call it in the detective work, gumshoe work of getting the story, and then you come to the story and go, and breaking news, as opposed to, well, this is what's been put out and this is what we're repeating, and here's the news press and the release, and you read it and kind of wrap it up, and this is and you put a bow on it and say, okay, back to you. You're live from wherever, because you can be live, and it didn't that didn't happen. I enjoyed the reporting, so we got into a police shooting on Kennedy, and when you're first, as I call first in, it's chaotic at the time, and Rich jumps out of the minicam, and we're like, come on, let's go, and he goes, and the ABC station was there, and he was already, their reporter was nose to nose with a sergeant or a commander, a supervisor, and they're nose to nose arguing. And then when I think the camera guy at the time, Howie Salzman, was like, this doesn't look good, and I was like, he's like, and when they're like, just stop, we're going to argue too, so he charges down the side of the highway and, gets into it. So we're getting the gear ready to go tape some stuff. And next thing, we're surrounded by Chicago cops threatening us to get arrested if we don't get out of there right now, and, the whole thing gave back and forth. And like, you're a youngster, and you're like, what's going on? And you're being threatened to be taken down to the district. And, I was like, okay, we got it. We survived that, got what we needed to do. But at the end of the time, I was like, this is nuts. I mean, I liked it, but I didn't care for it, because I had, at the same time, I had a taste of working in what we call TV field, doing network shows, sports games, and it was a totally different vibe, feel for doing big, I call them big shows. We're doing mini cams, a 1 or 2 camera show. Here we're doing football games that are 8, 10, 12 camera shows. You got 40, 50 people out there, and it was a whole different field.
Jack, can I interrupt you 1 second, just because I want to get clarification as we go? Sure. I want to compare generationally how it was at that time to how it is now in terms of competitiveness. Now I know most of the time when we're at news scenes, we get along pretty well. If someone needs a battery, we'll give a battery. Of course, if there's a big scoop, someone will go and get an interview from behind the scene. During legendary television, when you had the likes of Rich Samuels, when you had these people who, like you said, got scoops, it was legitimately you're working for a scoop. what was the level of competitiveness, or was there still that friendship, or was it different back then?
I think the crews were the same. I mean, I would think that I remember that as everybody there was nobody, sandbagging anybody, or, it was, if you needed something, if you, whatever, your battery belt failed or something, they would help you out. As far as the reporting goes, I don't know. I didn't get involved in that part of it. I'm sure there was some friendly competition, because there was, in the time, me growing up and even me getting into it, it was a very vigorous news media. And I'm not sure, I've been out of it so long that I'm not sure that it's the same now, where people were working towards a story or a big breaking story that it was an exclusive and it meant something. And I was just talking to an old friend of mine. I says, it's something I don't see anymore, either here in the Tampa market, or I talked in Chicago, is when the news stations, whether it be CBS, ABC, any of them, when was the last time did you see a 3, 4, 5-day expose on something that it ran in a newspaper, was in, you do a story with Channel 5 along with the Sun Times would do a investigative reporting, and it would be a blockbuster story for a week. And
Mirage Tavern, we were talking with, now we've had a couple of interviews, so I'm forgetting who, but we talked about Mirage Tavern, where the
Mirage.
Oh yeah, where they actually bought, hopefully you saw the show. If not, I'm going to give you a recap. They bought a bar, set up photographers in order to create this expose and catch public officials creating a situation of corruption. Permits were being paid off. This was the kind of, when I got into this line of work growing up in Boston with the Spotlight series with the Boston Globe, the kind of thing that made me think this is the kind of journalism and investment I want to do. Jack, I'm going to take a moment and talk about the fact, candidly and through discussion with people, I believe there has been a disinvestment in that type of journalism. You look at the fact that some of this is being outsourced even by the newspapers with ProPublica, which is now doing these in-depth research. Mm-hmm. I got to say, Chicago, I'm very proud of the fact that ProPublica is expanding, because any way we can get these investigative journalism, we're putting an investment back into community journalism. But I'd like to see a world where the television stations, the newspapers cover these things more often. Myself, like you said, there were exposés that people would watch.
Yeah, I mean, and it was the talk of the town. It wasn't something like, oh yeah, it was it would be something that you would read about and go, did you see what was last night's story? And it led you to the next story, and I kind of miss that. I don't see it very much anymore. And I don't see the fact that it could be the fact that there's I think a watered down, I'm going to say watered down. I don't know if it's there's such a wide variety of online bloggers, the new and quite frankly, the news, I'm going to say the mainstream media. I hate to use the terms, but mainstream media being the ABC, CBS, the independent. At the time, they were the only game in town. They were, when you went live, and this went for news people and for sports or anything. When you did a show, when NBC was there, when CBS was there, everybody stood up and took notice and goes, oh, NBC's in town. Or did you see whatever Cal Marine, or Cal Marine was out at the town hall tonight, or whatever. Peter Carl was here, and people, it was like that was their town was elevated and in the spotlight, good or bad, but people were made aware of that, and now I think, quite frankly, it's all watered down, and the weight of their stories, of anybody's stories, has kind of lost its potency. I mean, when is the last time have you seen or read, whether it be political or In the Hill or any websites or any news sites, that you go, oh, well, that's something we need to look into and carry on. It's like, oh yeah, well, that's the news cycle is spinning so fast, nobody can digest what's actually being reported. The information's hitting you so quick, people have become numb to it. And we've got to the age of the cell phone camera and people being citizen reporters. While it's exceptionally good and will hopefully keeps people, public officials and people in check. Are people watching it for the excitement value, or what's behind it? You don't see any follow-up on any of this. I don't know if you watch any people on YouTube. There's a guy, Jeff Mack Media or something. He's doing live streams from all over the country of all the various protests, the BLM protests, and he's a conglomerator of all these feeds coming in, and he'll go to both of them and he'll stay on them for a half hour, 45 minute, hour, depending on what's happening. And you're just watching somebody's video of what's happening. And it's like a voyeurism type of thing. You get to see, you're in the protest, you're seeing it, but after that, it's kind of like, it's okay, well, the show's over, or I get tired of watching it. And there's no analysis to what's going on. And there's no one, whatever side of the political fence you're on, there is no one doing any substantial analysis to it. And I think that's what's really missing in journalism. The journalists have not, with the exception of a handful of people, get in and start digging through what all this information we're getting and making sense of it. Because, the casual person who's working their 9-to-5 job and come home, they watch their half hour of news, and you get a glance over of what it is. And unfortunately, I don't think very much of the mainstream media, because it's so, they've become editorialists as opposed to reporters. And I think we need to get back to that. And I don't know where we've went off track with that. Whether you be on the left or the right, you need to, I think what we need is people to report the news and have some objective analysis and go, yes, this is it. And then how often do you see anything that's got equal time, both sides? And you can point to NBC or MSNBC or any of the sites and you go, well, they're anti-Trump, or Fox is pro-Trump, or whatever. And I think they're both of that. They're wild examples, and there's nobody covering what this all means, and to go really behind the story and figure out what it does. You just think of the current one with the latest document dump from I think, was it not John Strassel, but they're doing stuff, all the stuff that's went on, prior, during the Trump administration, prior to Trump administration, all this stuff that's going on in government. And it should outrage every person, not just, I'm a Trump supporter, or I'm a Democratic supporter, or whoever. There's people in the government that have abused the power that we loan them, and there's no one keeping check on them. And I think that's a big void in the media. And I think the media has really let down everybody, because somehow it's went to, let's get the quick, quote unquote clickbait. Let's get the quick viewer and move on, as opposed to,
it's interesting you bring that to the forefront, because again, as I have this show analyzing kind of our industry, so too does Karen Crane, who actually, her and I had a very intense discussion about the same thing, just the investment, the fact that the media needs to be the public trust, the fact that we need to be the fourth estate that makes sure that we get the truth out there, and what our obligations are to not only our industry, but our community that we're covering. And I think that's a very poignant fact that we really do need to reanalyze every so often to make sure that we're meeting our obligations to meet the public trust. I do want to capitalize a little bit on our discussion about editorialize, because another part of your industry, your work in this industry has been Jerry Springer. Now, I don't know, because I did interrupt you as you were talking between news and sports production. I don't know if you want to get into your time in sports production or jump right into Springer, throw us right into Springer like a chair would be thrown in the studio back in the day. I'll tell you this, I really want to know about your time as an EIC in Springer. But you tell me, where do we go first?
Well, I think it's a nice, the Springer thing may be a nice segue into the next topic, because kind of it's starting to be sensationalistic. because it was right at the time of Jerry Springer show started out to be a very news oriented show.
Kind of a Phil Donahue type.
It was going to be the next Phil Donahue.
Okay.
And, and people remembering Donahue was a hardcore talk show interview, long form interview. And they were grooming Jerry to be probably the next Phil. Well, and at the same time, the industry was going through a change. And that's when it started to become news / infotainment. And, and people may have been getting tired of the Phil Donahue or the hardcore 60 Minutes interviews. And we wanted something lighter.
Well, there was one show, as I recall, that changed the crux and the trajectory of where Springer was going. And I think it wasn't something that was expected, but really got a ratings boost. I remember I was at the age, I think I was a teenager at the time. There was a show called Talk Soup that chronicled what happened. It was a group of, if I'm not mistaken, maybe you were there. And if you were, maybe you could tell me what the behind the scenes was like. If I remember correctly, a group of white supremacists and activists. Tell me what happened. Was that a show you were on? And kind of.
Oh yeah, I was on. We had a lot of laughs on the studio floor that night because, everybody was uptight. I mean, again, going back, and we're talking how many years? 30 years ago? 70, 83, 84. I don't know it was the early 90s.
It was 87 to 90.
87-ish, yeah.
Yeah, old enough where I was watching on Talk Soup.
I don't even know, people, because I don't even know how prevalent it is anymore in Chicago or Illinois. We had the Illinois, it was featured on the Blues Brothers, the Illinois Nazi Party, and, you had, and I'm sure, obviously they're still around, but, they used to make their summer stands and go into different neighborhoods and make their rhetoric hate-filled speeches. And people, went out and it was kind of this playing footsie with the people on stage, and the neighborhood would throw bricks and nothing got accomplished. They got their half hour and, on their soapbox, and people, yelled and screamed, and the police got some overtime and got in between a couple fisticuffs and it moved on. Anyway, they were like, so now we were going to bring in the Nazi Party to come and talk to Jerry about white supremacy or something. And they kind of dropped on everybody like within a day or so. They didn't give us much warning of what was going to happen. And it kind of just was like, oh, by the way, the neo-Nazi party will be here tomorrow. But we're going to take care. We're going to have some security. And, well, that was good. I mean, security at the time was, they didn't have many metal detectors or people getting scanned, or we had essentially not the receptionist, but the security people at the front desk doing the reception. And they would, go up, Springer, you go up the elevator to 2, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, or they'd have a PA escort the audience upstairs or whatever. Well, now they're like, we're going to have some security. And everybody kind of got raised an eyebrow, like, whoa, the news department, because being in the same building, wait a minute, you're going to have the Nazi people. What's going on here? First off, that's a news story because no one apparently did it. I think Geraldo might have done it before, but Jerry was going to do it. And so we're going to have a news crew there. Okay, and that's fine. So we had them, and not only was it Channel 5, but it was everybody, all the news, we're going to see what happens here. And the news department was kind of nervous about, their control room was essentially adjacent to the Springer control room, which is right across the hall from the studios. So, they were like, whoa, they're going to take over the station. Well, no, that never happened, but the nervousness was there. So we had to go into a general lockdown. And, and again, we were going back before security was as forefront as it was, where you didn't have key cards. You didn't have, every door was almost open, or, there was no access to, there was only a combination access to the, master control or whatever. It was a way lighter feel. So they were like, we're going to have, we're going to have some security. So they hired like 3 or 4 off-duty security guards. Steve Wilkos, you might know Steve Wilkos from the Steve Wilkos show. He
So
was
he was there originally in the beginning as well when all this went down?
Oh, yeah. He was one of the first guys. He had a group of off-duty Chicago police officers who did part-time job work as security. And he brought in 4 or 5 guys, and they were like, yeah, we'll do, and I mean, essentially they were bouncers, think about it as club bouncers. And so they had them stationed throughout the studio. And of course it was the normal, everybody locked down. We had a lockdown at 6:30, all the doors would lock, and the crew 2 people had to stay in the control room. We don't know what's going to happen, and of course what happened was the usual yelling and the chair flying and, people getting upset and I say emotional and, screaming and hollering. We talked about it. Nothing got resolved. Got a great ratings. And at the time, I think it was one of the transmissional moments where like, let's do extreme talk TV. And, it made Talk Soup. It made all the stuff. And put Jerry on the map. And it was one of the little road markers on the path to sensationalism, and then it just got more and more. Again, we took it, we just didn't stop there. Everything had to top that. And then it became crazier and crazier. And,
because people do get desensitized, right? They've seen it the first time. Oh my God, what did we just see? It makes every talk show, makes everything. But by the 4th time you see a chair getting thrown,
right? You're yelling at me, I'm yelling at you.
Oh,
I mean, quite frankly, it makes for really bad TV, but it's something at the time, it's new, it's different. No, we never had, oh, did you see Springer? They had a fight. Well, and then they kind of got other guests, family disturbances, craziness. And then then the security guards got involved and did the, phony, I wouldn't say phony, but step in between the guests and, try to play refs and,
Jack, I'm going to ask you this because this is something that we didn't touch upon. Tell us what your role was in this capacity. You were what was called an engineer in charge. Is that correct? Kind of tell us what that means.
Yeah, that was for WMAQ. I kind of invented that term for them. Huh. It was a term used out in the field in sports television and remotes, where the engineer in charge was the person in charge of the mobile unit, the TV truck. And he was basically the senior engineer on the show, responsible for anything that went wrong with the show. Any break, if you had an issue, tape machines, cameras, switchers, anything, the engineer in charge had to make the call, evaluate it, and go, this is a showstopper. I can fix it. Give us 5 minutes, whatever. And
your timing is impeccable on that, because Bud actually asked during the course of the show how much equipment was broken.
You know what? The worst part was the lavalier mic, the wireless mics were busted, and it wasn't from, believe it or not. Yeah, occasionally there was one from the fights, but what was really bad was the women dropping the microphones in the toilets in the green room, because when they would get wired up, of course you'd be wired up for the set and then go out there and. Before they get out there, I have to go to the restroom. Oh, I dropped this in the toilet. That was part of our job. One of the jobs of the EIC was to clean the wireless microphones and get them back show ready, And so that became a joke because, obviously every week there'd be 1 or 2 that got wet, got the swirly. But, that was the job. But at the time, well, first off, Springer wasn't the first show. Was the Jenny Jones show was the other talk show that was a very female talk show that happened in the bigger studio. And that was in there earlier, quite a few years before Springer came in. And I had been chosen to run that show because of the fact that the staff was being cut. I was freelance. They hired me as a freelancer for that. And I had experience in entertainment shows outside of the Channel 5 environment, working with entertainment producers, directors, which is a whole different mindset to staff people. And the people, Telepictures came in, and they came in from the West Coast, and they were used to doing 4-walled shows at CBS Television City or studios on the West Coast, which were they would literally build a studio with 4 walls, and they had to bring everything else in. That's where the term 4-walled came in. Their studio would be 4-walled, and they would put everything inside it. Well, NBC was like, hey, well, let's try it here. And so little did they know that there was a lot of extra work to do with that, because 4-walling was a whole new concept to a TV station. And the producers, the production managers, they wanted stuff now. It wasn't like, well, I'm going to need this for the show. I need these kind of microphones, this kind of, you'd get guests with a spec list, or if you were doing a musical guest, you'd get a spec list what the band needed. And half the stuff was, well, we don't have any of this. We can get this item out of mini camera and this and that. No, well, news wants this. So you had to there was a lot of legwork to prep for different things.
So this is what the EIC did. You were basically
you had to coordinate that stuff.
Okay.
Right, and then work with management, the engineering management, and go, hey, they're doing a big show Wednesday. We're going to need this, and they want us to provide it. Well, who's going to rent it? Who's going to inventory it? Who's going to return it? So that all kind of fell into that EIC, and they're like, well, what are we going to call you? You're not a maintenance guy. And I was working under the NABET rules, but I was a freelancer. And they're like, well, you're a group 5 maintenance. Well, I'm not. And at the time, as I told them, and I had a fairly good relationship with management, I'm not a group 5. I'm not a maintenance guy. I'm making decisions for the show. So I should be a supervisor of some sort. And we came up with this, and we're like, when EIC, there was no EIC in the contract or anything. And that was where it all kind of developed. And even though the EIC term was used in the industry, it was never used in the TV station area, because who's an EIC? You're never, no one's in charge, and in the fields, there had to be somebody to make the call that says, this is going to stop the show, and you had the technical authority to do that. The show's going to be down for an hour while I fix this camera, or we're going to have to do something, and you'd have to explain it to the production people, which, and in their terms, you had a crew of 25 people standing around waiting for something to happen. And in a TV station area, now we've got a problem. You got a switcher problem, and it's the TV station's responsibility to maintain it. And so I had to do the go-between between the client and the staff. And the best way to do that was I had a relationship with the maintenance people. I had a relationship with the production people. So you were a good liaison. That's how it all started. And then, it became a fairly profitable thing for the stations to do. But they also found out that it wasn't just, it's a full-time job to do. And that was how it was created.
I understand at some point there was some friction, because again, you're trying to advocate between both show and the actual television studio. Kind of explain to me though what the thought processes were, because I guess you went back and forth a few times.
Well, the thought processes are the people from I'm going to say the West Coast or the entertainment group are used to getting their own way, for lack of better. We'll sum it up that way. Mm-hmm. They're very demanding and want to get what they're paying for. That not necessarily was not always a thing with TV station people, because they're used to, I got a newscast at 4:00. What do you mean we need this, or what are you going to do that? We're going to need this for our show. Well, that's all cool. That's fine and dandy. But you've got paying customers in the studio that you made a promise to. And now you're telling me they're going to have to wait till the 6:00 show's over. And the people that are paying top dollar are going, that ain't going to happen. So I ended up becoming the go-between to go, here's the situation. Here's what we got to do. Let's come up with a solution. And sometimes it was creative thinking. Sometimes it was a little black ops thinking too, and a lot of times, let's just say that I'll admit it now. I think the time has expired that I may have went behind some people's backs and did things that were not, by the book, but to get it done. Things had to happen, and whether if some certain managers needed to know or they didn't find out, well, that was good enough, and it was one of them. Let's do it and plead for forgiveness. And but it was an interesting time, And it was not everybody in the station was on board with running a rental facility, or and they weren't quite up to the task of high demand clients, and a lot of it was crazy stuff, but that's not what they were used to. They're used to putting out, a schedule and saying, this is what you're going to do. And, and everybody, did what they did. The news people came and went, and crew 2 came and went, and you got the studios like, hey, we're going to need something crazy. And you're like, nobody was used to that.
It's interesting cyclically how this works, because again, you're talking about the phenomenon of four walls where you're putting together a show. But if you look back traditionally in the history of some of these, there were these local productions. There was, Bozo. There was local production shows. Then it went over to news predominantly. I know I've talked to some directors that said we went from creative to a fast-paced news, but now you're dealing with these four-wall shows that are being brought in from LA. So it seems like it's kind of a cyclical thing, and we can hope that some of these shows come back and that there's local productions again.
Well,
but tell me, so how did your experience with Springer then go? I know you said it kind of changes some of your mentality in terms of you were looking long-term, what you wanted to do.
Well, I did Jenny for, the run of the show, which is 6 or 7 years. And then Springer started during Jenny. We did two, there was a time when both studios were doing talk shows on alternating days. We used the same cameras and same gear, but they had a switch between studios, and there was a whole, not a hard technical thing, but it had to be done. But after a while, after 5 days a week, or sometimes 6 days a week of doing the same stuff, the talk shows, and in talk shows, and then, they take on a whole life cycle of their own versus what we're doing. Every season was a little bit different, more more serious, less serious, more crazy, more wild. And then literally depending on the market. I mean, Springer was ready to be canceled like season 3 because people had got burned out, and then someone had a wild idea of, let's do a year of showgirls and strippers and prostitutes and expose that kind of wildlife. And so and then that ran it's got a shelf life, and once you can only talk about that so much, and you got to move on. And then as it got on, it became more of a scandalous show of, I dated your brother's and father did this, and incest, and all the stuff that was, taboo, socially taboo we got into. And so that was going on. And at the time where my little maintenance shop office was right by the offices and the show offices, and by the green rooms where the producers would set up guests, prep them, and all the producers would prep your guests and say, we're going to do this, and here's the premise of what they would all get a premise. They would all be brought in on a premise of, we're going to do this, talk about this. And in reality, producers knew where they wanted to take the show, and what hot buttons, what would get the audience involved, what would get the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak. And in where you would be sitting, you would hear the pre-production setups going on for either side, man, female, it didn't matter. And you would thought, and at the same time, it's kind of I don't want to send anybody over down the river, but it's a sensitive topic, because it still bothers me, because it's like, you look back and go, is that really ethical? Is it really, did you serve a purpose doing that? Because what happened was they'd set people up, and it would be like, hey, we're going to talk about topic I, and your family's in, about this, and how you guys are all together, and you guys live together, and you have, 15 kids, and you live in one house, and all of a sudden you're on stage, or they're on stage, and the show takes a turn, and it turns all of a sudden that, oh yeah, your daughter was, sleeping with this other person, and all of a sudden
So you made a conscious and moral decision for yourself that you wanted to step away from this. You got out of
yes.
After a while.
After you see it, and because then you not only see, you heard it, okay, it's in the bed, you're like, oh boy, here's what's going to happen. And part of what I did when I ran the shows, I usually stay close to control room, because if there was a problem, the producer or somebody would want to look for you and you would be there. So you'll be sitting in the control room as part of the show. You'd see everything, and you kind of see the chuckles, the laughs. And then unfortunately, I'll say the dirty side of the business, the side of this is after the show, people, they would, after you would be having a hurtful moment, your family was hurt, deeply hurt, and be upset and running down a hallway crying or slamming the door in the ground. I don't want to talk to you, or whatever. And then you've seen the whole thing develop, and then you see the aftermath and go, these people are going to go home now and rebuild their life, because they just got and a lot of people didn't realize they were getting into what they got into. And once you uncap that, you can't take it back, and I think it hurt a lot of people. And I don't know how some of these people did it and where they are. I don't think it served the main purpose to anybody. So yeah, I made a decision to, this was really not helpful for me. Kind of frustrated me, and what really bothered me was seeing, and it didn't matter, the segment producers or whoever, literally high-fiving everybody when they had a great segment. And when I say great segment, there was tears and gnashing of teeth and real heartache. And then, the show goes, you high-five everybody in the control room, and the lights are off in the studio, and you guys go home or go to the bar and have a beer. And then the leftovers there, you got a family that's going home now, get them back on an airplane and see you. Thanks for contributing. And now they got to pick up their pieces.
Jack, let me ask you this.
What purpose does that serve?
Let me ask you this. So we got about 5 minutes left here.
Sure.
Give me kind of not only an analysis, but kind of a projection of where you'd like to see the industry go. I know we talked about investment into kind of investigative journalism and the kind of work that was done by legendary television journalists in the past. Kind of give me kind of not just me, but all our viewers, what your hope is going forward.
Well, what I would like to see is that the people who are journalists today doing the news, cover the news, and actually put on don't follow a corporate mantra. I don't even know if there's a corporate mantra. If you're going to find an email somewhere saying, this is what we got to do, but go out and cover the story and do if you see something wrong and go, that's not right, or that doesn't seem right to me, check that at the door and go figure out the story yourself, and literally prove all things to yourself. Trust and verify. If you got a tip, if somebody's saying something, okay, I'm going to take a spokesman for anybody who's in office who has a spokesman, and they say something, you take that and then you go verify that, are they right, and do it yourself. Don't just take their word for it or take the opposing party's view for it. Put them up together and weigh it and figure it out and do the story on that and go, this is what they're saying. And if it's wrong, if it doesn't come out the way you want it, that's fine. If it comes out everybody has their own bias. Everybody has their own bias, and especially in this season of political heatness, if it comes out that somebody did something that's wrong, it's going to help everyone in the long run, as opposed to touting what we think, because you have to let your own, as a journalist, you have to get the information out and let the individual decide. And what I'm seeing is we're having a lot of people thoughts being steered, as opposed to just throwing it out there and going, here's what this means. And this is what it really means, guys. This guy, whatever, he may have worked for so-and-so, or this guy may have worked for, they did it is wrong. And we need to go after that. If we want to rebuild what we have to really get back to having an independent media. And if it doesn't fit the narrative, that's really going to damage. I mean, what I'm terribly worried about is big tech censoring people. You can see it now with Facebook. You can see it with Twitter, YouTube. If people don't, granted, I get it. It's my platform. I can do what I want with it. But if you're going to become a news platform, it's got to be, you shouldn't have the right to take stuff down because I disagree with it. If I disagree with it, I go, oh, I don't see it that way, and move on and read the next story but to blatantly block people or go, nah, we can't hear what he's got to say it's dangerous.
As a journalist, I think the censorship or anything else to cancel the thought is one of the most dangerous things, as opposed to a free discussion of ideas, getting everyone's perspective out there and having the opportunity to find that not only middle ground, but get yourself out of the silo, right, and hear what the opposing point of view is. I think that's a great note to leave it on. I do want to thank you, Jack, for joining us today, telling you, again, if you're just joining us, you might want to go back and watch this because Jack has touched on a lot of subjects, including
the discussion. We've covered a lot more philosophical stuff in the business than a history lesson, and I am concerned. I hope that the people who are the reporters and stuff do more work that will make everybody think. And my other wish is that everybody would just listen to everybody. If you don't like my idea, that's fine. But listen to what I got to say and then go, yeah, he's an idiot. That's fine. But you know what? At least when I said something, it was in the back of your head going, it may moderate your idea or it may not. But we all got an
opportunity to have that discussion, right? Someone may think, but then have that argument with you, and maybe you don't change your mind, but maybe you hear a different perspective. As a journalist, I think it's incumbent upon us, like you said, to go in there and at least foster some of that dialogue, some of that discussion. And again, we got to wrap it up here, but I do want to thank you very much. Not only, and just to recap, you guys might want, if you have any interest in the stringer lifestyle, hear about what that adrenaline is like, because as we continue throughout this whole process, there's a lot of discussion that's going to have to happen, as we talked about, a lot of opposing views. And as journalists and as people who are consumers of journalism, these are discussions that need to be had. Jack Suske, thank you so much for joining us for another discussion on Media Essential Workers. Stay tuned a second after this broadcast as well. We're going to end it here, but I would love to talk to another stringer about more shared experiences.